Well, welcome to the 700 Club. 1 week after Donald Trump's presidential victory, Republicans are in position to control Capitol Hill. The GOP has already taken the Senate from the Democrats, and it has the edge in keeping control of the House.
Several Republicans are competing for the top slot in the Senate as longtime leader Mitch McConnell is stepping down. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London has the latest.
As of now, Republicans appear to be on track to keep the House majority. They have 214 seats out of the required 218. With 18 races to be decided, we may not know the overall outcome for days.
After retaking the Senate, members will vote for a new party leader Wednesday to replace Mitch McConnell, who's stepping aside after nearly 2 decades at the helm.
One of the most gratifying results of the Senate becoming Republican, the filibuster will stand. There won't be any new states admitted, and we'll quit beating up the Supreme Court every time we don't like a decision they make.
McConnell, the longest-serving party leader in U.S. history, first won the job back in 2007.
You guys know how long I've been around. I had really hoped I'd be able to hand over to my successor the majority.
The 3 main contenders are South Dakota Senator John Thune, Texas Senator John Cornyn, and Florida Senator Rick Scott, whom chief political analyst David Brody sees as a possible frontrunner.
The energy right now is with Senator Rick Scott. There's no doubt about it. You got people like Tucker Carlson, Elon Musk, others that are in Trump's orbit lobbying for Senator Scott. So that's what makes it interesting. It makes it a wild card.
Whoever wins, Donald Trump insists they support his ability to install recess appointments to his cabinet. Meanwhile, Wyoming Senator John Barrasso is expected to take the number 2 slot as majority whip. Barrasso telling NBC's Meet the Press Sunday that the Senate will act swiftly.
The mandate are the 2 things that people cared the most about, which is the high costs and the open border. And those are the things we're going to start working on immediately.
As for the House, votes in at least 18 uncalled races are still being counted, and Republicans are on track to keep their majority next year. Democrats lost a competitive race in Michigan, where Republican Tom Barrett defeated Congressman Curtis Hertel, flipping the state's 7th congressional seat. The Democrats' last hope for flipping the chamber rests on 5 Republican-held seats in California, 2 in Arizona, and 1 in Iowa, where GOP incumbent Rep. Marionette Miller Meeks is likely headed for a recount. Republicans currently lead in all those seats, as Democrats also fight to protect remaining vulnerable seats in California and Colorado.
In Pennsylvania, several outlets have declared Republican David McCormick the winner. But with nearly 100,000 ballots left to be counted, Democrat incumbent Bob Casey hasn't conceded. Michelle London, CBN News, Washington.
Well, in other news, as the Senate prepares for confirmation hearings, President Trump is busy choosing nominees for his cabinet. He may not want to take advice from me, but I hope he's counting the number of congressional representatives he has before he nominates any more representatives to the cabinet. He might be in danger of losing the majority. Well, John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. A new batch of names coming out of the president-elect's camp. He's expected to choose Florida Senator Marco Rubio as his Secretary of State, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem as Secretary of Homeland Security, and Florida Congressman Mike Waltz to be his national security advisor. Trump already has named New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and former Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Tom Homan as border czar, responsible for deporting immigrants who came to the United States illegally. We're turning now to Israel. The nation is still reeling after Muslims targeted and attacked Jews following a soccer match in Amsterdam. Israel's new foreign minister helped evacuate thousands of its citizens from the city. On his return, Gideon Sa'ar said his country is battling a level of anti-Semitism not seen since World War II. CBN's Julie Stahl reports.
This wave of anti-Semitism we see right now is focused on, I call it new anti-Semitism, focused on the denial of the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state, focused on the denial of the right of Israel to self-defense,
Special evacuation flights brought 2,000 Israelis home over the weekend after the Amsterdam attacks. Part of that is due to Jews being denied rights like self-defense, which the UN grants to all nations.
When we are talking about the country that is most attacked in the world, most threatened in the world, with other UN state members like Iran speaking publicly and deliberately about eliminating it. But this country is attacked with an effort to deny its right to self-defense.
Sa'ar is calling on all nations to stand up and make Jewish communities secure, much like Germany did a year ago when it criminalized the Palestinian chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
To take care of incitement against Jews and against the state of Israel as the only Jewish state in the world, and to combat seriously the phenomenon of new anti-Semitism with all its expressions.
Following meetings with leaders in the Netherlands, Sa'ar believes they understand the challenge.
We discussed different ideas, how to deal with it, what to do, and I'm sure that will take place in European level.
As for the war in Lebanon, Sa'ar says there's been progress on a ceasefire agreement, which must include Hezbollah's total disarmament with no ability to regain strength.
Even if we will reach to an agreement, the most important thing will be not the words in an agreement with Lebanon, but the enforcement and the willingness and the decisiveness.
He adds, while bringing security to Israel, it would also benefit the Lebanese people.
We will assure that Hezbollah will not be a threat to Israel. But the international community can assure the future of Lebanon as a free country, a sovereign country, not enforced to be an Iranian proxy, which I'm sure that the majority of the citizens of Lebanon don't want to be.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. Gordon, back over to you.
Well, you can just feel the heaviness as he's speaking that, you know, you've got to wonder why in the world does he still have to point this out to the world community? Here we are in 2024. It's a year after the horrible attack of October 7th, and you have to go through the exercise of pointing it out. And it does seem to just be crazy, where truth has been turned upside down. That chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," we have heard on the streets of New York. We have heard in our college campuses. We have heard that again and again in this election season. And it's just a mystery to me that the entire nation didn't stand up and say, no, not on our watch. You don't get to chant that in our streets. I am a full proponent of free speech. But that speech in particular needs to be called out for what it is. It's a call for genocide. It's a call to kill every single Jew in Israel and wipe Israel off the map. Let us realize what it really means. Let us stand against it and stand for the truth of this matter. Hamas started this horrible war. Hamas was the government of Gaza. Hezbollah has seized control of Lebanon, is using southern Lebanon as a military base to launch rockets against Israel. Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. Of course, it has a right to strike back and not just sit there and take it. It has to take out the rocket launchers. It has to take out Hamas. It has to free its hostages. The entire world should get behind this and say no to this radical Islamic terrorism. It's a death cult where they prefer to die in jihad rather than live in peace with their neighbors. Let's recognize it for what it is. It is evil, and let's call it for what it is. Let's stand with Israel in her time of need. Let's continue to support her with everything that we have so that this truth, this wonderful land that's been a light to the nations, they've done so many wonderful things for all humanity. Let's stand with her in her time of need. Well, the nation of Israel has faced continual threats since its founding back in 1948. Despite ongoing wars, the Jewish state has thrived. It's also been a source of help for other nations in their times of need. Stand Up Nation is a new book that tells how Israelis are sending humanitarian aid and sharing their expertise with countries around the world.
In the early hours of October 7th, Israel faced one of the most brutal attacks in its history. Shockwaves from that day touched the depths of Israel's soul while igniting a storm of grief, fear, and uncertainty. In this time of death and darkness, a profound resilience began to rise. AVIVA KLOMPAS, author of Stand Up Nation, takes readers on a journey through the lives of unsung heroes and ordinary Israelis living extraordinary lives. Her book captures Israel's indomitable spirit and the heart and grit of a people who, even in the face of terror, refuse to be broken. It's a testament to Israel's strength, not just as a country, but as a family that stands together. Forged from decades of adversity, tragedy, and enemies seeking their destruction, Israelis' determination has become legendary. Through powerful stories of courage and unity, this former UN speechwriter reveals how hope, faith, and the will to stand up allow Israelis to rise again and again. KLOMPAS also celebrates Israel's history and the Jewish principle of tikkun olam, healing the world. Today, that humanitarian aid includes helping war refugees seeking shelter on a Greek island, to providing wells to an African village bringing life-giving water, all in an effort to help heal our suffering world. It's an amazing, often untold story now revealed.
Well, Stand Up Nation author AVIVA KLOMPAS joins us now from our CBN News Bureau. Welcome to the 700 Club. It's a joy to have you with us.
It's such an honor. Thank you so much.
Well, let's talk about Israel's history. It seems to be incredible. Here's the nation the size of New Jersey. It seems to be punching well above its weight in terms of offering humanitarian aid around the world. Why is that such a seemingly well-kept secret?
That's exactly the question that I had, which is, why is this great story of Israel an untold story of Israel? So I used to serve as the speechwriter for Israel's delegation to the United Nations, and I was writing speeches on a huge array of topics that the UN covers: peace and security, economics, women's rights, and so on and so forth. But when it came to writing about international development and humanitarian aid, I found myself captivated when I was learning about the early story of Israel. It has this really remarkable situation where Israel itself is a developing country for its first 10 years. And it's in the context of this country being desperately poor, being a nation that is fighting existential wars against its neighbors. It's a nation made up of Holocaust survivors, refugees from Arab lands. Its economy is tanking. It is not the land of milk and honey as described in the Bible. It is dry, it is arid, and it's in this context that Israel goes and founds an international development agency. Israel, this tiny, poor country, has an international development agency before the United States, before Canada, before the UN has its development program. And I wanted to tell the story of how that came to be.
So your book goes into some of the quotes from Israel's leaders in history as to why, and those quotes really reverberated with me. It just seemed to be a national obligation that somehow if we don't do this, we're going to be missing out. What's the background to that?
So what happens is that Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, he appoints Golda Meir to be the first foreign minister. This is in 1956, so it's just 8 years after Israel is founded. And Golda Meir, as the foreign minister, is looking around the world, and she sees that it's a country that is diplomatically and politically isolated. It does not have a lot of friends in the world, a situation not unfamiliar to what is happening today. As I said, it's desperately poor. It's a country of refugees. The government has to institute austerity measures that are basically rationing basic goods. And Golda Meir says, I need to change this situation. And she's looking around at the context of the international community, and she's looking at the continent of Africa. Now, at this time, waves of decolonization are spreading across Africa. Country after country gains its independence and goes on to join the United Nations. So Golda Meir decides to go and take a tour through a number of newly founded African nations. And she goes, and what she discovers is that there's a situation very similar to Israel. The countries are new, they're emerging from under the thumb of colonialism, they're dry, they're arid, they're poor. Golda Meir goes to David Ben-Gurion and she says, the context is the same, but here's the difference. I am absolutely certain that Israel is going to transform itself into a prosperous nation, and in the process of doing so, I want us to lift up these other nations by sharing what we have. We don't have money, but what we have is knowledge, and we have what you're describing, audacity or chutzpah.
Well, what's the impact of that? You were at the UN. It seems to me that either the countries don't know about the aid that they've received from Israel, but it just seems like every time the General Assembly votes, it tends to vote against Israel. Why is that? Why isn't there gratitude for what has happened?
You're absolutely right. Every fall when we're at the General Assembly, we see that country after country votes against Israel over and over again. The same at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. One of the reasons is that Israel has never made it contingent. The aid is not contingent on political favors or UN votes. It's a true act of generosity to be able to do it. And I think that it's a reasonable question to ask about whether these countries should be showing greater reciprocity and favorability towards Israel.
Well, let's look at just recent history. You know, since October 7th, is the same fire to help the world, is that still there in Israeli society, or is there an inclination to pull back? And maybe it's too soon after Amsterdam to really answer, but are people feeling that they might actually be at risk in going to other countries to extend humanitarian aid?
What we've seen in the last 14 months since the absolute atrocities of October 7th is something that I don't think we'll see again in our lifetime. We're living through something that's a truly remarkable period of history, not just for Israel and for the Jewish people, but really for the entire world. And you can see that in the way that this war is being played out, as you said, on the streets of Amsterdam and Antwerp and New York City and throughout the United States. And what I would say is that even in Israel's earliest year, in the context that I described, the challenges that it was facing, Israel's leaders had a choice to make. And it would have been more than reasonable for their leaders to say, we have to turn inwards and we have to look after ourselves. The same thing is true today. It would be more than reasonable for Israel's government and for the Israeli people to say we have to turn inwards and look after only ourselves. And yet that actually hasn't been the response. All of the international development organizations that I profile in my book are still doing this work. It's much harder for them because right now it's much harder to raise money. Most people want to give money for the survivors of October 7th, for evacuees in Israel that have been forced from their homes in the south and in the north. But the determination to do this work, this willingness to do the work, the devotion to the work, that remains unchanged.
Well, that is a true testament to the spirit of Israel. It's always amazed me how much you want to reach out and help other people. And in that, I can't help but point out, Hamas has never helped anyone. Hezbollah has never helped anyone. And I'll put out there, the nation of Iran has never helped anyone. You know, that it all seems to be bent on this death cult. And it's amazing to me the world would rally around them and not rally around Israel. Absent a spiritual explanation that somehow or other evil attracts this kind of support, do you see any reason for that?
I believe that the American people and most people are decent, honest, good people that can tell the difference between right and wrong. And what we need those decent, honest, good people to do is to speak up. And one way that they can speak up is to help the hostages that are still being held in Gaza, 101 people, of which 7 are American, and 4 of whom are believed to be alive. And it's imperative on every single American, on every single decent person, to learn their names and to take up their cause and ensure that we bring them home alive.
In doing documentaries on Israel, one of the amazing things that I've discovered is that even secular Israelis who aren't reading the Tanakh, aren't studying Scripture, are saying, just from their innermost being, we are supposed to be a light to the nations. What can the world learn from Israel's leadership in this?
I love that question. I actually divided my book into 4 different chapters. I try to make a case for why Israel is doing this work outside of its borders. As we said, it's an untold story, and as you pointed out, there's no reciprocity. Israel doesn't seem to be benefiting economically or politically, so why does it happen? I think it goes to the core of who Israel and the Jewish people are. So I speak about how the reasons it happens are for what you said, tikkun olam, this idea that we can build a better world, the pragmatism, the simple idea that every person wants to have a better life for their family, for their community, for their society, and for their country. The adventurism, this desire that all of us have to go out into the world to meet and experience new things. And chutzpahism, which is that audacity, that notion that you can look at the world and say the problems are absolutely overwhelming and one person can't make a difference. But I profile people in this book that say we can absolutely make a difference. Look what we've done.
Well, the book is wonderful. It's called Stand Up Nation. You can find it wherever books are sold, and you can learn the secret of why Israel is a light to the nations. It's a really incredible read. So, AVIVA KLOMPAS, thanks so much for joining with us, and you can be assured we're standing with you. We're standing with Israel in her time of need. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Farming is hard work. It involves back-breaking labor that begins well before the sun rises. Lori BIRKHEAD was not fully aware of all that it entails, but she was fully determined to try it anyway because she had been given a vision from God.
The very first time I had the dream, it was like someone had a video camera and they were spanning property like from left to right, and I saw ponds and pastures and trees, and it was just very beautiful. And then at the end of this vision was just a voice, and the voice said, buy land, grow food, and give it away.
At first, Lori BIRKHEAD didn't pay much attention to the dream she had in 2009. After all, she was never much of a gardener. But when it kept coming back over the next year, she became convinced God was telling her to start a farm. Her husband, Jim, wasn't exactly fond of the idea.
Jim, also being the logical man he is, had said in the beginning, Lori, you know, that's not a dream, that's a nightmare.
Jim, a dentist, had worked on a farm as a teenager.
I don't think she had an idea of the amount of physical labor involved in farming. I knew it was an arduous objective.
But the dream came back still. And so by then, my heart really started to change. God was preparing me, you know? I was meeting people who were involved in agriculture, and there were other things happening too that kept putting me in front of agriculture.
Then Lori had another dream that seemed even more far-fetched than the first. She says God told her to sell their home and buy a farm during a 2-year slump in the real estate market.
And I woke up thinking, no, I can't do that. I felt like it was God, but I was still in barter mode, you know, like I test the waters a lot with God in prayer.
Still, they obeyed and put their house up for sale. Jim still wasn't totally convinced this was God's plan.
He goes, you know, if this house sells, that's going to be God saying go to the farm. And we got a call from the real estate agent, and she said, we got a contract on your house with no contingencies. And that's when Jim, I believe, got chills and said, I guess we got to fund that farm. So that is how God brought Jim on board, because prior to that, he was just too logical to think of doing something so illogical.
A few months later, Lori and Jim purchased a 97-acre farm in Jolton, Tennessee that needed a lot of work. They named it By Faith Farm.
I didn't know what exactly was ahead, but I did know that God was totally in this, and that I didn't have to be afraid.
Jim continued to work full-time in his dental practice while working on the farm with Lori during his time off. That first year, they had a small harvest they were able to donate to a local food bank.
when you give, the giver receives the best blessings and grace from God. And you felt useful in God's mission because you were there to do it. So I did get to see a lot of happy faces.
Over the next 4 years, the farm, the harvest, and the giving expanded. By now, word of the farm had spread and volunteers were coming in from all over to help, get a taste of farm life, and draw closer to God.
We're working together as a community to give back to the community, but we're also sharing our faith with one another, which just, that's been the joy in all of this.
Even through the storms, the farm would go on. Like in 2016 when Jim shattered his hip and ankle in an ATV accident. It not only forced him to retire from his dental practice, he wasn't sure if he'd be able to continue helping with the farm.
There was a kind of a pessimistic bewilderment of what's going to go on now. You know, am I going to walk the same? Am I going to be able to do the things I want to do? Am I still going to be able to help? I was kind of fearful and a little depressed.
And I questioned, you know, is this the end of the farm? And I just thought, okay, I don't know how to do that. How do you sell God's farm? You know, I didn't feel like it was mine to sell.
Turns out they wouldn't have to sell. When folks heard about Jim's accident, they showed up in droves and kept the farm going until Jim recovered from several surgeries and rehab. Then in 2020, when COVID shut down the country, By Faith Farm became a place of peace and renewal for volunteers who continued to keep the farm growing and giving.
I could come to the farm and put my hands in the dirt. It was very therapeutic for me. And then it became very therapeutic for many people because everybody wanted to get out of the house and be in a safe place so we could all be on our own row, you know, weeding, doing harvesting, whatever we were doing at that time. And it was beautiful.
The Birkheads admit that while answering God's call was risky, it was worth it. To date, By Faith Farm has donated almost 200,000 pounds of food to local charities and food banks. But to them, it's more than that.
When you help people by actually getting out of your comfort zone, God will bless you abundantly. And when you think things are not going your way, that God will provide with his resources.
I believe that the purpose of the farm is not just about feeding people's bodies, but we all need spiritual food too. And I believe that nature is the most beautiful place that we really see God and we get to know him through nature. So listen and then step out in faith and you will be blessed abundantly.
I agree with Lori. Nature reflects who God is in an amazing way. What a wonderful way to promote the family farm, feed people healthy food. I mean, I'm all for it. I think they're doing a great thing.
I'm all for it, but I grew up on a farm, and so I'm looking at it going, that's a lot of work. You know, we
no
had,
shovel for him.
We had acres of pasture that needed mowing. Dad had an organic garden, and guess who was the gardener? And it was just a lot of work. And I admire that. Okay, but if I have that dream, I'm rebuking it. I'm just no, not for me.
I'll take it.
Well, I will grow some tomatoes in the backyard and
there you
some
go.
basil and some other things. It does taste a whole lot better.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question
and it's
about
really good.
it. Yeah. You hate to see anything happen to the family farms in America other than to thrive.
Welcome back to Washington for the CBN Newsbreak. Wildfires are still burning on both the east and west coasts. Dry and windy conditions are fueling the flames on both sides of the country. In the northeast, the Jennings Creek fire, burning across New Jersey and New York, turned deadly. Police say 18-year-old Daryl Vasquez, a New York State employee, was killed by a falling tree when battling the fire. Out west, firefighters have gained ground on the mountain fire that has scorched more than 20,000 acres in Ventura County and destroyed more than 100 homes. Well, a strong opening day for a new holiday film. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever finished #3 at the box office last weekend, bringing in just under $11 million. The film tells the story of 6 mischievous siblings who get into all kinds of trouble, including hijacking the town's Christmas pageant and instead ending up with leading roles in the play. You can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.
Well, Elena and her 2 brothers tear up every time they remember how painful it felt to go to bed hungry. Well, today, thanks to you, they always have plenty to eat.
Marguerita is a widow. She's raising her 3 children in Guatemala and survives by washing clothes and running errands using a motorcycle her husband left to her.
The money I earn only pays for the basics. My son often gets sick with lung infections, and I am not able to afford medicine to treat it.
Marguerita told us her work is not consistent, sometimes only 2 days a week. When that happens, the family goes hungry.
One night, we had nothing to eat. That day, we only had tortillas with salt and lime, and we had a bit of coffee. I was still hungry.
9-year-old Elena remembers other times when they ran out of food.
My mom told us that there was no food for us, and my brother started to cry. I comforted them.
It hurts a lot because, as a mother, it's my responsibility. And because I love them, I have to figure out how to feed them.
Then Operation Blessing arrived and invited Marguerita to take part in a chicken project. First, we trained her how to raise healthy chickens and to manage a poultry and egg business. Then we built her a chicken coop and gave her 195 hens, feed, and medicine.
Currently, I'm collecting 150 eggs a day, which I can sell for more than $20. Lord willing, I will collect 180 eggs a day in the future. That will mean I can potentially earn around $780 a month.
Things have completely turned around for Marguerita and her children. They now have money for food and other expenses.
When I saw the first egg, I was so happy. I thought, now we won't be hungry anymore.
I am very grateful to God and Operation Blessing for coming into my life. Thank you.
That thank you goes to you. If you're a member of the 700 Club, you're part of giving that family a hope and a future to go from hunger, from poverty to self-sufficiency, the dignity of being able to make your own way in the world, to not be dependent on others, but be dependent on God and realize God loves you, people love you. We want to come alongside and help you, and not a handout, but a hand up. If you want to be a part of that, it's real simple. Join the 700 Club. A portion of every gift you give goes into the work of Operation Blessing, and you help people right here in the United States and around the world. Another portion goes into preaching the gospel, and in these days, now more than ever, we need to resolve we can finish the Great Commission. We can preach the gospel to every language, every tribe, every tongue. The technology exists. The ability to do it exists. It's now up to us to say, yes, in our generation, let's fulfill the will of God. Let's fulfill the Great Commission. You're a part of all of it when you join. Now, how much is it? It's just $20 a month. That's 65 cents a day. Some of you can join at higher levels. We have them for you. 700 Club Gold at $40 a month. 1000 Club, $1,000 a year. That's $84 a month. We have 2500 Club, $2,500 a year. Founder is 5,000. Chairman Circle, 10,000 or more a year. At whatever level God is speaking to you to give, do it now. 1-800-700-7000, or you can go to cbn.com, or you can text CBN to 71777. Now, when you call and join, I've got something for you. It'll increase your prayer life. Pray with Power. It's a wonderful booklet, 40 days to transform your prayer life. And so each day is set aside in this booklet what to pray, how to learn how to pray the scriptures. And then there's a wonderful teaching from Charlene Aaron, how God revealed to her to transform her prayer life, how to pray the scriptures. And then Charlene and I have another conversation where we discuss our joint journeys, our different journeys to arrive at the same conclusion. When you pray the scriptures, you're praying with power. It's yours when you join, so call us. 1-800-700-7000.
Gordon, this is Sherry from Clarksville, Ohio. She's already received her Pray with Power. She says, I've been very blessed with the 40-page Pray with Power prayer journal. It's helped me have deeper thoughts about scriptures and how they affect my life. I love worshiping the Lord through prayer. You can see it's making a difference in the lives of people who have it. We want you to have yours too. So call now, text now, go online now, but join with us. First, her husband was a no-show for dinner. Then he didn't answer his phone or respond to texts. Daphne knew something had gone terribly wrong when she couldn't get in touch with her husband. Then she heard a knock on the front door.
Charles left here that Thursday evening around 6 o'clock. After around 7:30, we didn't hear anything from him. So my daughter and we kept calling him and texting, and we didn't hear anything from him, and that was so very unusual.
What seemed like an ordinary Thursday evening to Daphne Brazil was about to become one of the darkest times in her life.
I was getting a little nervous. It was so unlike him to not be here, especially for dinner.
Daphne's husband, Charles, had run to his real estate office to catch up on work. As the hours passed with no word, Daphne grew concerned. Then around 10 p.m. came a knock on the door.
I looked out the window and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the police. My heart was beating so very fast. I opened the door. The police said, is this the home of Charles Brazil? At that moment, I was just numb. It was just too much to take at that time.
Charles, husband and father of 3, had been hit by a drunk driver. He didn't survive.
I didn't even really know what to say. I just sat there in complete silence.
Her pastor was called, and soon Daphne was surrounded by family and church friends.
I needed that support. It was comforting, but it just seemed like every second was hitting me. Charles is not here. Charles has died. Charles was hit by a drunk driver. And I kept thinking that I was having a nightmare, and I needed for the nightmare to be over with because I just couldn't believe what had happened.
By 2 a.m., everyone was gone, and Daphne went to bed. Unable to sleep, she took her pain to God.
I just had to just sit there and just try to grasp what has happened. Just didn't know what to say or what to do, or it was just in a deep, deep, deep hurt. I just sat there in complete silence and just let him talk to my heart. I knew that he was going to be there for me to comfort me and help carry me and the family through this.
Even though she was hurting, Daphne says she had no hatred for the man who took her husband's life.
God had taught me a lot about forgiveness. And so I knew that that was something that I was going to have to do, but the pain was still there. The pain and the hurt was still there, but I knew that I had to let God do his job.
As the weeks turned into months, Daphne and her family continued to rely on the Bible and God for their strength.
I just see his hand all over my life with just taking care of everything for me. He continues to carry me, comfort me, console me whenever I feel just a little down. I don't get lonely because I know that the Lord, he's here with me.
Then in February 2023, 21 months after the accident, Daphne finally faced the man who killed her husband. It was his trial, and she read her victim impact letter to him.
I forgave him, and my prayers is that he would turn his life around while he's in prison. It was just God just speaking from my heart to him to let him know that God loves him and God has mighty plans for him, and that he's forgiven by me. I don't think I could have forgiven the young man without God's help. If I hadn't forgiven him, I'd probably have an attitude. I'd probably be mean, angry, hateful, not a good person.
The driver was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison.
I told him that my husband would have been 57 the year of this trial. And I said, I pray that you touch 57 souls while you are in prison, and that it will, that your story will make an impact on their lives.
Although her healing is still in process, Daphne has experienced the peace and freedom that comes with forgiving people who've hurt you.
It's very important that we learn to forgive people so that we could be set free. Because when you are in an unforgiveness state, it's like you are in a bondage. You're in darkness, and it really hinders your relationship with the Lord. Forgiveness is truly something hard, but guess what? With Christ, it can be easy. I'm a living witness. It can be definitely easy if they choose to let the Lord comfort them and help them through that process. It can be done 100%.
Life is wonderful, but it's also filled with unexpected suddenlies, with loss, with unfairness sometimes. And what Daphne's talking about is taking the repercussions of all of that in your heart and in your mind and giving it to the Lord so he can set you free. You know, lots of times, I think, in a relationship with God, he asks us to do what is counterintuitive to us. You know, if someone takes your jacket, give him your shirt also. Not fair. You know, if someone does something against you, don't be bitter, don't be angry, forgive. God doesn't ask us to do those things, to take that position of letting go, because he just wants us to march to the tune of his drummer rather than our own. God tells us to do those things because he wants us to have what Daphne talked about. He wants us to be set free. She is so right. When we walk in bitterness or resentment, even hatred, it eats us alive. May not feel like it at first. You know, those feelings are overwhelming, and sometimes you feel so justified in hanging on to them. But Jesus treats me with the kind of justification that says he accepts me just as if I'd never sinned. And then he turns around and he asks you and me to do the same thing toward others. You know, there was no guarantee to Daphne that that young man was going to change. No guarantee that in that moment when she shared so vulnerably, that he actually got what it was she was saying. But she was praying over him in what she said, that God would take what had been ugly and selfish and unfair and make something that matters out of it. And do you know that's what Scripture says God will do? Oh, the Word of God is so full of the promises of God. You need to know what they are so you can claim them, stand in them, pray them over yourself and pray them over other people. All things, this is God's word, all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purposes. All things, the good, the bad, the ugly. God promises to take it all and make something that matters out of it. The question is, will you give it to him? You know, it might not be the loss of someone to death in your life, but maybe it's the end of a relationship you didn't want to end. Maybe it's drugs have swallowed you whole, or someone you love and you're just sick and tired of being grace-filled and merciful. Give it to God. He's so much bigger than we are. He gets us from the inside out. He made you. He made you. He's more than enough for your circumstance. Just ask him. That's prayer. Just ask him. Jesus, I need you. I need your way over my way, and I surrender. If you need prayer, call our toll-free line, 1-800-700-7000. I want to leave you with these words from Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. God bless you.